I have worn glasses since I was 9 years old, and for 41 years I ground lenses, fitted frames, and read the small print of other people's faces without once thinking of myself as a perceptive man. Perception, as a tool of my trade, had everything to do with focal length and nothing to do with what was actually in front of you. I mention this because the evening I am about to describe taught me, at the age of 70, rather late in the lesson, that the two things are not the same at all. It was a Thursday in April. The Hartwell Arts Trust holds its annual fundraising gala in the old assembly rooms on Market Street, a Victorian hall restored about 15 years ago, so that now it has its cornicing back and a chandelier that works and a floor that doesn't creak too badly if you step toward the center. I had been a trustee for 6 years, which meant I attended every gala and spent the evening nodding at people I half recognized and nursing a single glass of white wine until it reached room temperature. My wife Claire had a grandchild arriving imminently and declined to come. I was, in that polite way of civic duty, entirely alone. There were perhaps 45 of us that evening. The room smelled of beeswax and someone's expensive cologne, and the Bechstein upright. It stood against the east wall in a shallow alcove, its lid up, its keys exposed, had been polished until you could see the chandelier reflected in its black flank. I had never, in 6 years of galas, heard it played. Reginald Vane arrived late, as important men tend to do. He was the principal sponsor of the Trust's new concert series, had endowed the thing personally, a fact he managed to introduce within 4 minutes of walking into any room. He was large and ruddy, and wore his money the way some men wear a hat, slightly too prominently. He moved through the room with the leisured authority of a man who had already decided he was its most important feature. I was standing near the piano when he arrived, drifted there as I often do at parties, gravitating toward the wall. Beside me, just past me, was a small woman in a gray-green dress who had been standing quietly in the same spot for some time. She was perhaps 68, with silver hair pinned up simply, and she held her glass of water, not wine, water, in both hands, at waist height, as though she had forgotten it was there. She was looking at the Bechstein. Not the way people look at a piece of furniture. The way you look at something you know. I had assumed, I confess it freely, that she was on the catering staff. The gray-green dress was not the sort of thing the usual gala guests wore, and there was a stillness to her that set her apart from the circulating warmth of the room. Reginald Vane passed us on his way to the drinks table and paused. He looked at the piano, then at the woman beside it, then at his watch, as a man does when calculating the evening against his own requirements. "We're a little flat in here," he said, to no one in particular, though his eyes were on the woman. "Could you play something simple to warm the room up? Background, something light. Just fill the silence a bit." He said it the way you ask someone to open a window. He had already half turned away before he finished speaking. The woman looked at him. She had gray eyes, very calm, and she did not rush her reply. "All right," she said. No protest, no disclaimer, no nervous laugh. 2 words, quiet and unhurried, as though she had been waiting for precisely this question and had known exactly what the answer would be. Vane nodded without looking at her and moved on toward the cluster of committee members near the far window. I stepped back, some instinct, and the woman set her water glass on the edge of the trestle table without looking at it, turned to the Bechstein, and sat down. What happened next is the thing I have spent 2 years trying to describe accurately, and I am still not sure I have the tools for it. She sat, and she did not immediately play. She adjusted the bench, 2 precise turns of the height knob, no more, and then she set her hands in her lap, not on the keys. 4 seconds of a woman sitting quietly at a piano while a party went on. Then she placed her hands on the keys. I want to say the chord was loud. It wasn't. It was full, is the word I keep coming back to. It filled the room the way water fills a glass, from the bottom, completely, without announcement. The Dvorak Piano Concerto in G minor, the first movement, begins with a deceptively simple cascade of notes that open outward like a room you didn't know was behind a door. That is what she played. The conversation nearest to me stopped first. A woman in a red dress turned her head. A man to my left, mid-sentence about something to do with roof repairs, simply stopped speaking and did not continue. The sound was happening to them. I watched it travel across the room like weather. Vane, at the far window, did not turn immediately. He went on speaking for perhaps 30 seconds longer than everyone else, the last person in the room still making noise. Then someone in his group stopped responding, and then another, and then he turned, and I saw his glass of champagne pause halfway to his mouth and stay there. I should explain that the Dvorak concerto is not a polite piece. It is expansive and searching, and at points it is enormous, not the ostentatious enormousness of a piece that wants to impress you, but the enormousness of something that has a great deal it needs to say and has been patient about it for a long time. She played it from memory. There was no sheet music on the stand and she never looked at her hands. Her eyes were open but focused somewhere well beyond the east wall. She was not performing for us. She was simply playing, the way people breathe, or walk a route they know by heart, without calculation or effort. The room was very still. Somebody near the drinks table set their glass down on the cloth with a care that suggested they did not want to make any sound at all. A man I recognized from the planning committee had turned completely from his companion and stood with his arms at his sides, his face altered in the way faces alter when something has reached them before they had a chance to decide whether to let it in. There is a passage in the first movement where the harmonic weight shifts and the piece opens into something that can only be described as interior. It is not sad, exactly. It is the musical equivalent of a room in a house that no one has been inside for a long time, full of things that meant something to someone, and the light has not changed and the dust has not settled and you are being shown it for the first time. When she reached it, I heard someone to my right draw a breath and not quite release it. I have no musical vocabulary for what I was hearing. I am a retired optician. I know about refraction and cylinder axes and the gap between what an eye can do and what a mind can perceive. What I know is this: she played without a single moment of self-consciousness, and whatever she had been carrying, quietly, for however many years, it was in the music, and the music was giving it to the room. At some point in the second half of the movement, I became aware of a young woman standing near the rear doors. She was perhaps 30, dark-haired, in a blue coat she had not taken off, as though she had arrived late and not yet settled. She was not moving. Her hand was at her mouth and she was crying, not the polite kind of crying that people do at concerts. She was simply standing there with tears on her face, with no apparent desire to stop them. I learned the fuller story afterward from Patricia Holt, the trust secretary, who had been close enough to the young woman to exchange a few words as people drifted out. The young woman's name was Rachel. She had grown up in the town, in difficult circumstances. The phrase Patricia used was very little to go on, which in this part of the world covers a range of hardships that polite company does not name directly. When she was 11, she had discovered the public library almost by accident, sheltering from the rain, and had been found sitting on the floor near the music section by the librarian on duty. The librarian had not sent her away or called anyone. She had simply sat down beside her on the floor, asked what she liked, and put into her hands a second-hand copy of a book about the piano. A book with illustrations of finger positions and small notation excerpts and the biographies of composers written for young readers. The librarian let her keep it. She simply handed it to the girl and said, "You should have this." Rachel had carried that book for 20 years. She had taught herself from it, one note at a time, on a battered upright at a community center, and had eventually won a bursary to study music formally. She had made a modest career teaching piano in schools 3 towns over. She had come to the gala because the Trust's newsletter had listed among its patrons a retired village librarian named Dora Melling, the woman she had spent years trying to locate, the woman who had sat on a library floor with a wet 11-year-old and handed her, without ceremony or calculation, the thing that changed everything. She had come to say thank you. She had not expected to find Dora Melling at the piano. The first movement ended. It ends quietly, a sustained note that diminishes and resolves, and then a silence that belongs to the piece rather than to the room. She held her hands above the keys for a moment after the last note, as though listening to what came next, and then placed them gently in her lap. The silence lasted. Patricia said afterward it was 4 seconds. To me it felt considerably longer. Then the room stood up. Not all at once. It started in the middle, spread to the sides, reached the back. I stood. Patricia stood. The woman in the red dress who had turned first was already on her feet, her face, I want to say undone, but that is too bleak a word. Opened, perhaps. Reginald Vane was the last to stand. He stood because there was nothing else possible in that room, and he stood with his champagne glass still in his hand, and he did not speak. The authority was gone out of his face. What was left was simply a man standing in a room, clapping, as if he were doing it for the first time and finding it a stranger act than he had expected. Dora Melling did not stand to receive the applause. She sat quietly at the bench with her hands in her lap, and after a moment she looked across the room, not at Vane, not at the committee, but at the young woman in the blue coat by the rear doors, who was still crying, who was not clapping because she could not make her hands do it, who was simply standing and looking at the woman at the piano as though she were the answer to a question she had been carrying for 20 years. They looked at each other across the heads of everyone standing between them. Then Dora Melling smiled. A small smile, entirely private, the smile of someone who has just learned that something they did long ago, something they barely registered doing, had mattered after all. Rachel found her afterward, in the little anteroom where coats were kept. I did not hear what passed between them. I only saw them through the open doorway, the young woman speaking in what appeared to be a rush, and the older woman listening with the same unhurried attention she had brought to everything that evening, nodding slowly, her grey eyes steady. I drove home along the empty market streets. Claire was already asleep. I sat for a while in the kitchen with the lights low, not doing anything in particular, thinking about the chain of it. The librarian and the girl on the floor. The book handed across without ceremony. The bursary. The teaching. The gala notice in a newsletter. The journey back. The piano. One small thing, a long time ago, in a library, on a rainy afternoon. And then all of this. I am a retired optician. I spent a long career helping people see what is in front of them. It turns out that what is in front of you is not always the most important part. Sometimes the most important part is what someone did, quietly and without fanfare, before you were ever in the room to see it.